In this chapter, the authors discuss the 9 steps for achieving a strategic communication campaign. They then examine several of these steps more closely, including how an organization should identify its goals and objectives, how these objectives should be approached for optimal success, and finally, how an organization can assess its own ability to meet these objectives. The process of reflecting on the organization, identifying whether the organization should be headed, and outlining how the organization will get there is known as strategic planning. An organization's strategic plan should serve as a framework for decision making, stimulate and guide change and growth in the organization, and serve as a benchmark and assessment tool for organizational activities. An organization with a clear strategic plan will have a clear idea of what it is, what it wants to be, and what it needs to be doing. Organizations with clear strategic plans act with purpose and waste no effort in achieving their goals. There are 9 overall steps that an organization should engage in. First, to conduct background research. Background research might include the extent or prevalence of an issue, who is being affected, and what the potential preventative measures or alternatives are. Second, identify long-term goals. The length of time for these goals, as well as the goals themselves, will depend on the type and size of the organization. Third, select short-term objectives. Much of the planning efforts are and should be focused on the day-to-day activities that will help the organization to succeed. Next, conduct a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis allows an organization to take an in-depth look at its own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It allows an organization to look inward before moving forward and ultimately pursue realistic but progressive goals. Next, analyze your target audience. The intended receivers of organizational messages should be consulted, analyzed, and understood before organizations make any attempts to pursue organizational goals and objectives. Next, develop messages. Messages should be developed in accordance with theoretical and evidence-based principles of message design. Next, select channels. There are many forms of media that can be utilized. The channel should reflect the organization's mission, its target audience, and the purpose of messaging. The 8th step is to consider community relationships, stakeholders, and partnerships. Organizations can often increase its influence, credibility, and effectiveness by partnering with individuals or groups in its community. And finally, develop implementation and evaluation plans. Set a path for success when your strategic communication plan actually launches, and decide how you will evaluate your progress and successes. The first step in developing a strategic plan should always be to do your research. Background research varies considerably depending on whether you are a for-profit, non-profit, or government organization. The process of reviewing and summarizing existing data is known as secondary research. Primary research requires the collection of one's own data. It can be expensive and time-consuming and requires training to do well. So, who in an organization is responsible for these sort of tasks? It depends on the organization, its structure, and the goals at hand. There are 4 criteria that can be used to evaluate the quality of the secondary research resources that are being used, namely accuracy, expertise, timeliness, and objectivity. A goal is a long-term outcome desired by the organization. An organization's goal or goals should be directly in line with the mission of the organization. Now, there are a few common goals that most organizations share, and they're listed on this slide. There are two general categories of goals that can be used to understand these further. The first category is task management goals. Task management goals might help the organization to sell its product, increase its consumer base, increase the individual or community wellness of its target audience, or impact policy decisions. The second category is relationship and identity management goals, which are goals centered on the identity and perception of the organization. Objectives are the smaller incremental steps needed to achieve it. They quantify the goals and state more specifically how they will be met. Informational objectives aim to inform or educate people about some relevant topic, event, issues, or product. Attitudinal objectives attempt to alter existing attitudes and underlying beliefs regarding the topic, event, issue, or product. Our attitudes are the positive or negative evaluations of an idea, behavior, or product. Behavioral objectives attempt to change what people are doing or saying. Organizations might have any combination of informational, attitudinal, or behavioral objectives. Goals and objectives are not interchangeable terms. They are interdependent and should inform one another, but should be treated as unique entities. The SMART method has become widely used by campaign designers in public relations, advertising, health communication, and a number of other fields that employ campaigns or strategic plans. So, what does SMART stand for? Well, S is for specific. The objectives for the strategic plan must be precise, clear, and detailed. M is for measurable. The measurement might be quantitative, in which results are discussed in terms of numerical values such as percentages or ratios, or qualitative, in which results are non-numerical and based on words or text. A is for attainable. Objectives must be considered doable by the organization and its members. R is for relevant. It is always important to evaluate objectives in light of the major goal at hand. And finally, T is for time sensitive. Objectives should have an expiration date. It is possible that not all aspects of the SMART system will work for each objective. A strategic plan is the sum of the objectives an organization intends to undertake to achieve its long-term goals. It is a written document that would typically be distributed among organizational members for informational, motivational, and feedback purposes. It is a fairly linear process. A SWOT analysis is an in-depth examination of an organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This practice is useful when it is directed at some particular goal or objective. There are two main areas of interest to consider, namely internal and external factors. Internal factors are those directly related to the organization. External factors exist outside of the organization or its influence. In terms of internal assessment, an organization's strengths are the benefits it has relative to the competition, whereas an organization's weaknesses are drawbacks that the organization faces. One factor that affects internal assessment is identity. We invest a lot of time, effort, and passion into the organizations to which we belong, and our personal identity or sense of self might be intricately tied to it. Our various social identities or memberships in various groups and how those groups are evaluated influence our overall personal identity or sense of self. Another factor that affects internal assessment is groupthink. Groupthink is a process of group decision-making that diminishes group creativity and individual thinking. To avoid groupthink, a group can take the following simple actions. First, appoint roles. Communication researchers who specialize in small group decision-making agree that minimally 3 formal, meaning appointed or elected, roles should be assigned to help the group function. These roles are a formal leader, a recorder, and a critical advisor. Now, of course, there can also be other informal roles. Another action potentially can be to change roles, where roles should not be stagnant. We can also encourage active involvement from all members. Communication apprehension means that you have high amounts of fear or anxiety when considering communication with other people. We may also want to consider to invite outside critique. This is the best way to avoid making a decision by groupthink. Another suggestion is to take your time. If enough time is allocated, you can alleviate the pressures that tend to lead to rushed, groupthink-tainted decisions. External assessments. An external assessment of an organization is a careful consideration of existing opportunities and threats, which are essentially factors outside of the organization's control. An organization's opportunities include events, trends, or factors outside of the organization that can be drawn upon to help it succeed. An organization's threats include events, trends, or factors outside of the organization that threaten the success of the organization. There are 5 tips you can use to set up and conduct your SWOT analysis. First, make sure you allocate enough time for a SWOT analysis. Second, think carefully about who to involve in the SWOT analysis process. Third, be sure to have the right amount of people for the SWOT analysis session. Fourth, carefully organize the SWOT analysis session, namely the brainstorming. And finally, the leader should set a series of ground rules for discussion. At the end of your SWOT analysis, you will have 4 lists of organizational members' perceptions of internal and external factors affecting your organization's ability to achieve its goals. Review and refine the information so that it is as precise as possible. The TOWS or TOWS analysis is a plan of action. The questions link the strengths and opportunities, weaknesses and opportunities, strengths and threats, and weaknesses and threats directly to one another. In sum, the importance and implications of the SWOT analysis emphasize the reflective and adaptive process of developing a strategic plan for communication campaigns.